Alright, well, since we have some pretty top tier weapons we can get from Nightfalls and Grandmasters, I think it's time we talk about the activity. Heads up everybody, my name is SentinelGray and welcome to the channel. So I was asked recently to make a video about the strikes that are on the normal Vanguard playlist tab known as Nightfall Strikes. These Nightfalls are a single strike that is on rotation once a week, so for a full week that Nightfall will be the same thing. Usually every season rotates 6 and only 6 different Nightfalls out individually, and if I remember correctly it's usually done at random, so you never know which strike is coming up unless we get an in-game message or something like that. Currently, Nightfall Strikes are the most rewarding they've been in a long time. Every week, when you complete a Nightfall Strike, you have a chance to have a very specific Nightfall weapon to drop for you that you can only get doing the Nightfalls. As of this video being made, there are currently 6 different weapons you can get from these Nightfall activities, all with an extremely diverse and useful perk pool that the game can pull from. For most PvE players, these are some of the most sought after weapons in the game, but that of course depends on your preferences and what you like to use. Now, Nightfalls have different difficulty levels. The harder the difficulty, the more rewards you can earn from them. And if you're determined enough, this is a place where you most often get rare upgrade materials like enhancement prisms and ascendant shards. But how do these difficulties differ? Well, in total there are 5 separate difficulties: Adept, Hero, Legend, Master, and Grandmaster. The Adept difficulty is very similar to the run-of-the-mill strikes you play in the Vanguard Strike playlist. The only difference is that enemies are just a tad bit tougher, and the strike has a modifier that can change how some of the enemies in the strike act. For example, if you're running a strike with Fallen, you could have a modifier that whenever you kill a Fallen Dreg or Vandal, they drop one of those Fallen slow mines on the ground, which could make things harder to move around. Beyond that, though, these Nightfall variations are pretty standard, so there's no real planning or build crafting you have to do to survive these. Usually the rewards for these Nightfalls aren't very special. Exotics and the special Nightfall weapons are an extremely rare drop, and you only ever get enhancement cores that you use for upgrades only once in a while. Overall, these Nightfalls are mainly for getting the powerful Tier 1 reward to drop for you each week without putting much work or effort into. Next is Heroic. Heroic Nightfalls are noticeably more difficult than your normal Vanguard strikes, but not by much. This is also the difficulty where we start to see champion enemies appear, and because of that, you'll want to bring weapons that have the specific anti-champion rounds you'll need regardless of what it is. On top of that, this difficulty usually also has a modifier from the Adept version, plus one that is unique to the strike. For example, the Fallen Saber Strike has a modifier that increases all incoming solar damage and environmental damage from things like arc conductors or whatever's in the strike. Heroics aren't too difficult at the end of the day, just be sure to take the right anti-champion mods you need. This isn't a strike where you have to have a fully dedicated build, so you don't have to worry about that. The rewards here though are very basic. You can commonly get enhancement cores to drop for your weapon and armor upgrades. While the chances are better for you to get exotics and Nightfall weapons from this difficulty, I wouldn't put too much stock in them actually dropping for you. Like once in a blue moon this might happen, but it's not as worth it as you might think. Legend Nightfalls are next. Here we have where the devs feel like if you do this level of difficulty, you should probably have a team of friends to run it with instead of random people through matchmaking. This is the first strike difficulty that has matchmaking turned off by default. Similar to the Heroic difficulty, on Legend you can tell that enemies hit harder and can take a bit more damage. Adding to that, this difficulty has all the previous modifiers that the other ones had, plus a few extra to make your grind more difficult. The first modifier is called Match Game, meaning that any damage done to enemy shields that isn't that specific element type of those shields does half damage. So basically that means you should look to fight Solar with Solar, Arc to Arc, and Void with Void, or else those enemies will be a bit tougher. The next is the Equipment Locked modifier, and as you probably can guess, once you enter this Nightfall, you can't change your gear literally at all. Everything from your weapons and armor to the mods on them, or even your ghosts, ships, or sparrows. You cannot change any of it. With all those modifiers and the difficulty ramped up, obviously the rewards are going to be better. For this mode, exotics and Nightfall weapons are known as common drops, with enhancement prisms being labeled as quote-unquote uncommon. The unfortunate part of this is that regardless of what the game actually says, RNG is still the deciding factor on getting a drop, so don't think you'll get something guaranteed every time you do one of these. Master Nightfalls are where the difficulty really ramps up. Like the others before it, Master Nightfalls have all of the previous modifiers enabled plus a few more. Not only that, but with this difficulty, you have a power level set against you that is extremely hard to attain. The only way to get there is to achieve the pinnacle power level cap for this season, plus level 20 on the seasonal artifact. Now with the modifiers, however, there's one that is always constant and another that changes depending on, what the game feels like giving you. The constant one is champion mobs. This just means that there are more champions in the strike than there were on the lower difficulties. So instead of fighting one champion, you may have to fight 2 at a time, or even maybe 3. The other modifier is usually something that affects the player specifically, like making it harder to heal or removing the motion tracker from the top left. This difficulty is where it pays to be prepared. In Masters, it's far more important that you have mods on your weapon and armor that'll help you during the entire course of the strike, which means that combat style mods are extremely useful here. Luckily, the trouble you have to go through to take on this level of difficulty usually rewards pretty well compared to the others. There have been many times where I'd leave a Master Nightfall with an exotic, a Nightfall weapon, and a few enhancement prisms. It's actually somewhat worth it. Finally, the big one, Grandmasters. These are by far the hardest piece of PvE content in the entire game and are absolutely nothing to mess around with. These Nightfalls are also linked to the Conqueror title, so if you ever wanted to maybe get your hands on that, then listen close. In Grandmasters, there are a couple things that differ from every other Nightfall. First is that it has a modifier called Extinguish, which means if your entire fire team dies, you get sent straight out to orbit, no respawning, period. Second is that during the strike, you have a limited number of lives your team shares, that every time you get revived, you spend a life. The only way to get more lives is to defeat champions during the strike. Third is that a modifier called Contest is activated. Contest is a modifier that sets you at a certain power level, which is usually a number of power levels below the Nightfall difficulty on purpose. I think it's somewhere around like 25 or 30 levels below. Because of that being the case, the game will literally not allow you to load into a Grandmaster Nightfall Strike without being the appropriate level with not only your base power level, but your artifact level as well. Hopefully, by what I've said, you understand how different Grandmasters are. If not, here's a few other words of advice. While Grandmasters would be the ideal place to put your builds to the test, a lot of the time it just boils down to surviving, so using mods like Protective Light are key during these strikes. As far as weapons are concerned, you want to heavily coordinate with your fire team to see who is bringing what weapons, anti-champion rounds, and exotics so that you guys can cover each other's weaknesses. These are not the type of activities where you walk into and test something out. You should have known exactly what you're already going to face during the duration of the Nightfall, and think about things that you normally would brush off. Case in point, the cannons on a fallen catch. Usually you'd probably just ignore or dodge them, but in a Grandmaster those things can one-shot you, so you need to take them out so your life isn't a living hell. Also, this is where you'll want to use certain builds and exotics you might not use on a normal basis. Yes, I know that Bottom Tree Striker and Insurmountable Skull Fort combo is very fun to use on like an everyday build, but you'll be a detriment to your team if you try that in any Grandmaster. Now, for the number one question of all, is it worth the hassle? My personal opinion is it wasn't until they brought in Nightfall weapons. See, the Nightfall weapons I mentioned earlier drop special variations called Adept versions when you complete a Grandmaster Nightfall. These Adept versions have the ability to slot Adept mods into them, which can do some insane things for your weapons. On top of that, you usually complete a Grandmaster and get 1 or 2 exotics and a few super rare materials you can use on your weapons and armor. Plus, like I said, if you want to try and get the Conqueror title, this is the only way you can do it. Grandmaster Nightfalls are never required for any sort of quest or anything, so if you even remotely have that idea running around in your head, don't worry. Grandmasters are only for players who want the challenge or a shot at getting rare gear. Another thing that I wanted to bring up that I apologize I didn't bring up earlier. If you want a shot at those Nightfall weapons, the only way you can really do that is to defeat champions. It increases your chance to have those weapons drop at the end of the Nightfall. So at the end of the Nightfall, you'll see something come up like Champions Platinum or something like that, meaning you've killed all of the champions in the strike, giving you the best chance to get those Nightfall weapons. I plan on trying to make full Grandmaster guides on what you should use or have on you when you go in there, so be on the lookout for those whenever they get activated during the season. But that is going to be it for me for today. I hope you all enjoyed this little intro into Nightfalls and their difficulties. I know this is more suited to players who either are new or who have been away for a long time, but regardless, I hope this helped. If you liked the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more like those Grandmaster guides I was talking about. However, if you like live content, I stream on Twitch every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll have a link for that in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. And remember, keep your heads up and be kind to each other. Bye now.